Do you feel like there's a difference between the desire to automate the role in direct versus indirect? Because I feel like we've seen some of these sort of automation, autonomous sourcing solutions, but they've always been very tail spend oriented. Like anything that is the unmanaged, the island of misfit toys, the unmanaged of the unmanaged of the unmanaged, because that's where it's a no-brainer. Versus direct, you've always considered as managed. So I'm kind of curious if you feel like there's the role of automation is actually maybe still uniform, or if there's actually really different ways that people should think about this stuff for direct versus indirect versus tail.
Yeah, in fact, forgive me if this is heresy, but I'm going to maybe ignore the direct and indirect distinction for now.
That's
I
okay.
would say low complexity versus high complexity, right? Because on the tail spend, that's it. That's indirect, and it's goods, and it's more simple, and it is easier to automate because you can build business rules around it. You can, and increasingly on the service side, you can kind of catalogize those things. You can build out your AVLs and, kind of keep things relatively simple. And it's kind of lower spend. It's not as critical. On the direct side, you also have C parts, right? You also have things that are less strategic. And there are places where, you're making allocation decisions, right? So coming out of a supply planning run, what are my best allocations? Well, you can build business rules in there, and you can do it's kind of like tail spend, to kind of do some more tactical sourcing, almost 3 bids and a buy. And you can do that in business, or actually do 3 bids and a buy, right? I think you can do that autonomous sourcing on simpler direct stuff as well. But it also does help on the most strategic, direct, areas because of either mega market baskets and the complexity of that, and hey, the more we can apply automation, right, and use AI to help with that, that's a good thing, even if it's just helping the bidders participate in the event, understand what they're doing, get better outcomes in the execution of it. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think it is interesting. I like the idea of getting away from direct and indirect as the main, because it is very much like an accounting driven distinction, because COGS is direct and SG&A is indirect. It's consumed by the business versus going into the product for the customer. But I will say that you are right. And when I think about how we market our business, we always say that we do direct and strategic indirect. But what we don't really focus on is tactical or tail indirect. And it's funny because some of the most complicated events are not the direct material. Some of the most complicated are the really large indirect packaging, logistics with scenarios and constraints and award optimization.
Yeah, renewables, renewable energy, really complicated.
Huge. I can only imagine how strategic it is buying GPUs right now. That is a full domain. You should hire someone just to do that. Maybe teams of people just to do that if you're at one of these hyperscalers. So we don't draw that distinction, but it's sort of hard for me to have like a very concrete opinion on this because I think automation is easier as you go simpler. So tail, 3 bids and a buy. There was this, you don't want to spend $10 worth of a person's effort to buy a $5 stapler. That was the classic OG Ariba example. You're spending $20 to buy or $50 to buy a stapler. And so the problem that people should solve is like, how do you transact as easily and quickly as possible and just get the stuff and then don't worry about it. But the prize is still significantly bigger on the large scale sourcing side, right? If you think about direct and large strategic indirect, you're never going to optimize the tail enough to make a difference when you can make like a small change there and it yields huge results. But it's more difficult to automate. And so I don't think people have looked at it as much.